It is ridiculously difficult to find a perfect sequel. Perfect sequels only exist once in a blue moon. You got stuff like Shrek 2 and Terminator 2, and everyone talks about those, but no one really talks about Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and I feel like that's a bit weird. Obviously it's not a movie yet, but the game Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is such an underrated part 2 of anything that I think I've seen in a long time. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 manages to outdo its predecessor in pretty much every single way. Five Nights at Freddy's 1, it set the stage for this genre of horror. It brought something new to the table that hadn't really been seen before, and it was the first big IP to ever cash in on the whole animatronics is spooky kind of thing. It was the first of its kind, that's for sure, but it definitely wouldn't be the last. And with all these mascot horror games that are coming out nowadays, it's difficult to forget where it all started. When it comes to the perfect sequel, as I mentioned before, I like to think of things like how the story was improved on, how the gameplay was improved on, if we're talking about a game, in this case we are, how designs were improved on, how the soundscape improved. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 definitely improves on literally every aspect of its predecessor. Now we're going to start with the character designs. I feel like that's a really nice and easy spot to start at. If we're talking about the designs in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, we're going to have to talk about all 6 of the main characters. I know there's people like Balloon Boy and Mangle and the Puppet. I want to talk about the main cast for a minute here. Not only are the main cast completely remade for this game in the forms of their toy counterparts, they are present in the game as they were in the previous one in Withered forms. Now for most of this game's runtime, we believe that the game that we played previously is the predecessor to this game in canon, in the canonical timeline, I guess is what you'd call it in the timeline. That's what I'm looking for. We believe that whatever happened between now and then, something big happened that caused the animatronics to start rotting away, to the point where they had to be put away in a back room and pretty much just left for parts and scraps. I mean, it would make sense, right? The room's called Parts and Service or something like that. Now, while that is the case, it's not quite as much of the case as we might think, but we'll get to that later when we talk about the story. The character designs in this game have been improved tenfold. I feel like in the first game, all 3 characters kind of looked the same. Sorry, 4 characters. I just realized I'm forgetting this guy. How could I ever forget this guy? In the first game, they all kind of seemed to share the same character model with certain tweaks that made them stand out from one another. Obviously, Bonnie had the bunny ears and Chica had the beak, but I feel like they all looked pretty similar. They almost looked like they had the same base, and everything else was just kind of tweaked to make them look like different animals. But in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, there's certain tweaks to the character models and certain design choices that really set them all apart from one another. They're all extremely distinct, which obviously wasn't a problem in the first one. It's a really minor nitpick that I'm bringing up here, just because of how much I love the Withered designs of the characters in the second game. They look more manic, more bloodthirsty, and they look creepier than they did in the first game, in my opinion. I know that everyone likes to say that Bonnie is the creepiest looking one, but I like to disagree, and I'd like to bring your attention to Chica here. Them being withered and run down allows for a new layer of horror, this whole body horror thing that Chica's got going on, with the arms being stuck out to the sides and the jaw being cracked open, almost like the character is in a constant state of discomfort and pain. It adds another level of creepy factor for me. There's something about Freddy's eyes in this one as well. They really have this unhinged look about them, as if Freddy doesn't really have any moral code whatsoever. It almost makes you forget that these are children possessing these animatronics. It makes you think that there's some serial killer or something that's possessing him instead. The way that he looks, the way that he stands. Everything about how the original characters are designed really stands out in this game, so much more so than the first game. And for a long while, I remember when these versions of the characters were the ones that people used by default instead of the original character models. Speaking of the character designs, it's difficult to ignore the toy animatronics. Now, the toy animatronics came along as part of the ploy or decoy, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. This decoy that we're getting something new, out with the old in with the new type beat, right? We were under the illusion that these old animatronics got replaced with new ones. These new high-tech ones with all this new face scanning technology. They can detect criminals and all this stuff. They had this innocent look about them. They look like something you crack open in a Kinder Egg. They don't look like something from a horror game, but that's when the game reveals to you that the old characters still very much are alive and they are roaming. They serve as a nice decoy. They make you load up the game and they make you think, they don't look so scary. They look absolutely fine. They're not creepy at all. Even when you put them in creepy lighting, I don't think they look scary in the slightest. So it comes as even more of a shock when we see these old, broken down, moldy animatronics coming for you, because it makes you think, okay, whatever was going on before is still not done. We're not finished with that. It's not over. And then as the game progresses, you learn that it's not even started yet. I think the toy animatronics serve their purpose well. And when I first came across this game, I always saw them as a decoy. I never saw them as anything really except a distraction from the true horror that was going on behind the scenes that the company don't want you to see, which is sitting right there in that back room. I think one of the characters in this game is slightly overdone though, and this is something that FNaF started to do later into its life cycle. I think a character like the Mangle suffers from something like over-designing. This happens in horror all the time. Characters get over-designed. They get pumped full of the spooky factor to the point where it oozes out and it's no longer scary. You've got this character coming at you with 1,000,001 limbs, and it's got that kind of color palette. It doesn't really hold the same spook factor as something like this. It loses any and all sense of uncanny valley that it might have possessed before, and now it's just up in your face and trying to scare you. The scariest part of the first FNaF game, as I mentioned in my old video, is that it wasn't really trying to scare you too much. Your imagination did most of the work for you, so the developers didn't really have to do anything. I say developers as if Scott didn't make that game by himself, but you know what I'm saying. There's a sense of dread, a sense of the unknown when one of these things is in front of you, but you put the Mangle in front of you and all of that kind of goes away. It's very obvious what the Mangle is trying to do, and it's another reason I think Foxy is the least scary of all of the original animatronics as well. I feel like he has the sharpest and scariest stereotypical design about him, unlike a character like Chica or Freddy or Bonnie, who look a little bit more innocent on the surface but are clearly hiding something sinister underneath. It's all a psychology thing, really, and when you look too deep into it, you start over-analyzing this fuzzy, cuddly bear horror game, but at the same time, it's really interesting to talk about. Like I mentioned earlier, Soundscape is a big, important factor of horror, if not one of the most important factors of it. So when you get something like Five Nights at Freddy's that comes along, which is limited in terms of gameplay and mechanics, Soundscape takes over as one of, if not the main, source of fear. The soundscape in this game is incredible. It's on par with, if not better, than the first game. I think it is better than the first game. The FNaF 2 ambience has blown up both as a meme, but also just because of how creepy it is. It's stuck with people. After all these years, it has stuck with people, and it hasn't left our minds since. And it incorporates that into the game mechanics too, and this is a good segue into the game mechanics because I wanted to talk about that as well. This game has introduced a few new mechanics, as we already know. Came out a decade ago, I'd hope you know that by now. The music box. This is a huge one. The music box is one of the most important aspects of the game. You let that thing wind all the way down and boom, you are dead before you can even count to 3. But that music box going off, that music box in the bottom right corner, those constant noises it makes, the noise it makes when you wind it up, the noise it makes when it goes off, those are the sounds of impending doom and delaying the inevitable. It's a constant reminder that there's one extra thing coming for you that is unseen, completely out of sight, and you will not see it until the second that you die. It won't show itself to you. It's almost like it is death itself. And by winding up that music box, you are literally prolonging death. You're avoiding death like this is a Final Destination movie or something. The gameplay mechanic adds so much more fear to the game. It adds an extra layer to it. There's an extra thing that you have to worry about alongside of the dozens of animatronics that are coming after you to kill you. You have to worry about this music box winding all the way down, because if you let that thing wind all the way down, there is no way that you're getting out of that with a mask or a flashlight or anything like that. All the different sounds used in this game are made to throw you off guard. They add life to the game's location. Now obviously the game itself, there is no 3D space in which these characters exist. It's all 2D images and things like that. But the game uses sound to make it feel like a real location, to make you feel like you're actually there, to immerse you in your surroundings, even though your surroundings don't really exist. The sounds of the vents being banged on as things crawl through them towards you, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the sound of giggling throughout the restaurant, everything just comes together to create an amazing soundscape alongside the amazing ambience that this game has, really creates and sells this horrifying atmosphere, this horrifying space that you're the only occupant of. The only occupant with a soul, that is. Speaking of isolation and things like that, this game isolates you more than a lot of the other FNaF games do. There are no doors, and this was the first one with no doors. There is no way that you can stop anything trying to get into your office. You have to let things crawl into your office. You have to let things stand there and stare at you while there's nothing you can do. You sit there and you stare back. You're completely helpless. Stuck in this chair, you can't get up and move. All you can do is look around. It's like you're tied to the chair, or gorilla glued to it, or something. You're stuck there. There's nowhere that you can go. There's nothing that you can do. All you can do is check those cameras and wind that music box, prolong your death, until that clock hits 6. In the first FNaF game, there was this level of comfort that they introduced with the doors being closed. If you closed both doors, even though it would drain your power like nobody's business, you were still safe for a pretty good amount of time. With this new mechanic, where there are no doors, only 2 open vents and an open hallway right in front of you, there is nothing that you can do to block these things coming off. They are approaching quickly to your location, and the only thing that you can do is slow them down. Whereas in the last game, there were patterns and methods you could use to completely prevent them from coming close to you at all. In this game, you cannot do that, and that is ever present with the puppet and the music box. Not only are you keeping everyone else at bay, with the puppet, you are quite literally just keeping it at bay. You're not keeping it away from your office per se, you're just trying to stop it from coming out. Everything in this game comes about prolonging the inevitable. It's all based around that. Absolutely everything, from your death to, well, I mean, death is the most final thing, isn't it? I'd say prolonging your death is the mantra of this game, with every character having unique traits about them that make them more difficult to deal with, and the sheer number of them on top of that makes this game infinitely harder than the first one was. Every character has a different way to deal with them, and everything you thought you knew about them from the first game is completely thrown out of the window, adding a new element of unknown to every single character in the game, even the ones that we're familiar with, or at least the ones that we thought we were familiar with. Cannot deal with Chica and Bonnie the same way you thought you could deal with them before. This time there's something new about them, something different. They've adapted to your strategy, and now they're coming at you from a different angle. One of the only things that you can do to stop them once they get close to you is put that Freddy mask on, but even that doesn't work against all of them, and it requires frame perfect timing, or at least I'm pretty sure it does from some of the gameplay that I've seen. Especially in higher difficulties, that thing requires frame perfect timing. You miss ever so slightly and they spot you. They know what you're doing, they know that your game is up, but they don't kill you instantly. They let you sit there for a minute and think that you're safe. They let you drop your guard, and then the second you don't expect it, that's when they jump on you. Now, the one last thing that we haven't talked about yet is the plot of the game. We think that this is a progression of the story from the first game. We think that this is a sequel, and technically this is a sequel. It's Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but in the timeline, everyone knows by now that this game takes place before the first one does. Now, we don't find this out until later. We think something fishy's going on with the phone guy who died in the last game, and we think that it's all a setup by him or something like that. We never really knew back then what was going on. But the reveal that the game is a prequel to what happened before only fills the player with more dread than they had at the beginning of the game. They think that this is a new location, anything can happen, all the cards are on the table, and it's an open playing field. But when we find out that this is a prequel, and that this restaurant has to go down the drain for the story to progress into FNaF 1, it instantly fills us with dread as to what's going to come next. Finding out that those rotting animatronics that we thought we knew from the first game are going to come back in pristine condition for the next one, and these new super high-tech animatronics are going to go straight down into the bin, it makes you wonder why. Without diving too much into the game itself and everything that we know now, as a first-time player, it really does make you wonder why. What happened? What's about to happen? Why are we still here? Especially that final night phone call when we get told we're not even supposed to be there. We are info dumped so much on the final night, and we are basically told that we are not going to survive. Suddenly, everything that we thought we knew is turned on its head, including everything that we thought we knew with the old characters, if that makes any sense. Suddenly, we went from thinking we knew everything to knowing absolutely nothing, and our questions are answered with more questions. It's like we got the answer dangled in front of our faces, and then it's all ripped away in literally a couple of seconds. The plot twist is probably one of the best plot twists I've seen in a little game like this. I mean, obviously now the indie market is stacked full with amazing games, but back then, this really did top the market. From its character designs, to its amazingly and brilliantly crafted plot twist, to all the game mechanics that the game introduced, to keep this one fresh, despite the really shallow gameplay, I think FNaF 2 stands on top as one of, if not the perfect sequel to Five Nights at Freddy's. It's scary, it has everything the original has, and more, and offers a fresh new horror experience for those of you who haven't played them before and are starting from 1 all the way up to the most recent release. Anyway, that's pretty much all I've got to say about Five Nights at Freddy's 2. What a masterpiece, what a great game, and it gets to join other pieces of media on my list of perfect sequels that are inherently, by obligation, worse than their predecessors. This one definitely breaks the mold and outshines the original Five Nights at Freddy's in almost every single way.